Amen. Awesome. All right, so this is the what we call the Afterburn. And so if you have comments or questions, you can raise your hand, and Weed will be going around with the mic. And then if you're on live stream, we've got Robert is already manning the live stream desk, and he will be also taking comments or questions. Let's try to keep the comments or questions to the teaching you just heard, or including some of the previous parts of this particular teaching on Are You Covenanted? Also, please be patient that some of my answers may be, I'm going to get to it eventually, so be patient, or it may be, here's the teaching that covers your question, because I may have a teaching that covers it, and it would be a lot more useful to you to hear the whole teaching than to have me give a 2-minute answer. I know some of you are thinking, when do you ever give a 2-minute answer? Okay, but never mind. Some of you are like, 2 minutes, right, okay. Stephanie.
When you were going through Exodus 34, I'm looking at verse 7, where it talks about watching over loving commitment, forgiving crookedness and transgression and sin, by no means leaving unpunished, visiting the crookedness of the fathers upon the children and the children's children to the 3rd and the 4th generation. I'm trying to correct my own thinking in regard to this, because I think that it's one of those, our fathers have inherited lies. When it talks about visiting their crookedness, it makes it sound like that's Yahweh that's doing it. But after reading in the progression of what you read, going to Leviticus 26 and all that we just read and the explanation that's there, if I connect those two together, it would make it sound more like when you won't obey, you get corrected, you're still not obeying, you won't get corrected, and then you'll probably teach your children, because it's the generational thing.
Right.
So we're teaching our children to disobey, because of our own disobedience, and we teach our children to disobey. Is that more of the correct way? It's not that Yahweh's visiting it, it's that we're doing it to our own kids by doing our disobedience and then teaching our kids incorrectly. Is that the idea?
Yes, and actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because while I was reading it, I wanted to cover that, and then somehow I got past that verse, and I was covering other pieces. The two pieces to this is this. In Exodus 34, when it talks about visiting the crookedness of the fathers upon the children and children's children, it's because we tend to do what we saw them do. If you are an alcoholic, I probably will hear from you that, well, my father was an alcoholic and my grandfather was an alcoholic and my great-grandfather. So, but that's a learned behavioral problem, okay? You can be the one who then chooses to say, this stops here. I'm not going to be that person that they were. Now then we see in Leviticus 26 and in verse 40 he says, but if they confess the crookedness of their fathers, now Christian intervention ministries and all those other kind of crazy things, they want you to literally figure out every sin your grandparents did and everything and confess them some way. It's sort of like a Catholic confessional thing. No, it wants you, by confessing means recognize and acknowledge where this is coming from. I am a part of the problem. I'm perpetuating and continuing a generational thing that is in my family. So if you can confess that, instead of saying, well, it's just the way it is, or it's just the way I am, or, it's my family's always been, no. If you can say, they were wrong and could have stopped it, I'm now going to be wrong if I don't stop it. I have that opportunity and I have that choice where I can be the one that stops this. So when it says in 26 of Leviticus, it's referring right back to, great connection, Exodus 34. And it says here, that crookedness which is going generationally, because the 3rd or 4th generation, meaning at some point 3 or 4 down, somebody's going to wake up and say, this stops here. Okay? There were certain things that have happened. I'll confess this with my family. My father's father treated him a certain way. It wasn't really nice. My father with me, I love him now. We've restored a bunch of things. He didn't treat me the best. I have made a commitment to treat my children differently. It stops with me. They're not learning what happened to me and what happened to my father and probably to his father going back. Do you understand what I'm saying? So somewhere you get to be the one that says it stops with me. Okay? When I do the wave goodbye and my son comes and runs and jumps in front of me so that I can put my arm around him and do the wave goodbye, I don't think I ever would have that thought to do that with my father. I know my father wouldn't have done that with his father, for what he's told me about that. But I've treated mine different. But that's a conscious thing to do. I chose to be the one that says, my son won't experience what I experienced, and it went back generationally. So he won't have the reference points, and he won't have all of that trauma and all that other things that went generationally. Think about the stuff in your family and all the things that have happened to you. You can choose to do differently with your children that was done with you so that they can experience something different. And then they will take that and bring that forward generationally. The confessing, though, in verse 40 of Leviticus 26 is acknowledgement. I'm acknowledging the generational stuff, and I'm going to take ownership of that, and it stops here. Because I know you got that, but I just was rewording it to confirm where you were going, okay? So hopefully that makes sense for everybody. So, because otherwise we get into this whole, we need to dredge up everything horrible in your generational stuff, and I know people have gone to some of these intervention ministries and confess it in front of the congregation and, and dredge up all, and it's shameful to have to do that. Why does everybody need to know all that stuff, right? Well, my great-grandfather, blah, 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 and then my mother did, why would you need to, if you're aware of it, your responsibility is to make sure it doesn't continue. Make sense? Okay, where's the mic? Okay, give it a... Okay, David's got his hand up. For those of you all on Facebook, this is Mr. David Botwick-Reese, who helps with all the Facebook stuff. And sitting next to him is his beautiful wife, Samia. Okay.
Yeah. Praise Abba for that. Indeed. And so Leviticus 26:41, just something that came out, especially after going through the Heart of the Matter challenge, in the verse where it says, if their uncircumcised heart is then humbled, just something that spoke to me was the relationship between uncircumcision and pride, and circumcision and being humbled. And so in our process of covenanting into Israel, needing to, of course, knowing that circumcision of flesh is required, and there's something humbling about that experience, whatever age you go and do that process, and also that we have to literally be humbled in ourselves of heart and flesh and get off our own throne to enter in. So just something that I really enjoyed, of course, in the scripture, bringing that to life of uncircumcision relating to pride, and that in all aspects we have to get off the throne, as you teach time and time again, to truly enter in fully, and then maybe, as Yeshua talks about later, of the poor inheriting it, is that poor in our own and hungry after his, and that is the true humility that we are called to do.
Amen. Thank you for sharing that. By the way, for those of you that came out of a Christian sort of background where they were told that circumcision of flesh was for then and circumcision of heart is for now, well, here is proof that they were always both required. Okay, so don't ever forget that he's giving them grief here because they had not humbled their uncircumcised heart, that they needed to have a circumcised heart. And the circumcision is the cutting away of all that pride. The circumcision of heart is cutting that out. So basically, when you come to me from now on and you start saying blah, 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 and it's all the me stuff and all the, your pride stuff, I'm going to tell you to cut it out or cut it off. That we have that in focus. Cut it out. Or I'll Bob Newhart you and tell you stop it. But that's the uncircumcised heart. There's a reason we have 64 parts of that teaching. Go back and listen to it. Okay? If you don't listen to anything else, it's probably the most important thing you'll listen to, because once you get your heart right, you'll want to do all the other stuff anyway. And so you got to get your heart right. Okay, where's the mic? All right, Robert, what do we got?
All right. First, before I go to the questions, Lisa Anderson is asking that please remember her 6-month-old grandson, Asher, in prayer, because he's having some difficulty breathing and has been taken to the ER.
Absolutely.
From Charles Davis, he'd like to understand Leviticus 26:29 a little more. What does the eating the flesh stand for?
Read Leviticus 26:29. And you shall eat the flesh of your sons and eat the flesh of your daughters, and I shall destroy your high places. It's not literal, okay, but we'd only be guessing, all right? But it is trying to tell you that, everything that you have, that you brought to bear is going to, just be devoured and ruined and destroyed. And so I don't want to just try to come up with, and I have ideas here, but they'll only be my best guess. I mean, this is just one of those verses that we just don't have a clarity. But it has to be the understanding of, when you're talking about eating the flesh of, what does that mean? At what circumstance would people eat the flesh of somebody else? I'm not talking about cannibalism. I'm talking about, when would you turn to that? When everything else is gone and you've got nothing else. Then you would turn to eat the flesh of your children. That means you've lost everything at this point. So maybe that's my answer for that real quick would be looking at it that way. Because if you could what would your life have to be like when you get to the place where you eat the flesh of your children? I mean, could you even imagine how bad that would have to look? Okay, next question.
From MTOI Lakeview. The question is regarding Leviticus 26, 23, and 24. If we do not respond to the curses, then we are contrary. At this point, is it like him rising up against us to take action?
Yes, I mean, look, when somebody's being contrary, okay, there's one thing, excuse me, you've seen this if you're a parent, you have children, and you've got some children that can act very contrary at times. What does that look like? I tell you to do something, you don't really want to do it, you start arguing with me. At some point, we're fighting about it. Now it's contrary. You're aggressively going against and trying to make a case for you, and it's not just you don't like it, you don't agree with it, and you're going to ignore it and just do whatever you want. Now you're aggressively and actively battling against it. You're an adversary now. Now you're working in a Hasatan type role. You're acting adversarially towards someone. Does that work for everybody a little bit? Okay, that idea of being contrary. Anybody have a child like that where basically everything's an argument? They don't just not do it or don't just ignore it and do whatever they want, but they have to fight you on everything. And so that's really what we're dealing with here. So Yahweh says, fine, you want to fight? We'll fight. Guess who's gonna win? Not you. Go ahead, and next one.
Michelle Voorhees asked, her children are adopted and they deal with issues that the birth parents have, and they have tried to teach them differently, but they struggle in some areas. Could the generational curses also be a spiritual matter?
Look, I'm just reluctant to send you guys spiraling back into Christianese, Christian ways, which is all this idea that instead of taking responsibility for actual things that you can do and fix and work with, that we're just going to make it be something outside our control and we just got to pray it away. I mean, I drive by churches with signs in front saying, praying to be debt-free. Why does that need prayer? Just go fix it. I mean, I'm praying for you to get off your whatever and accept your problem and fix it. I mean, praying to be debt-free? The spirit world didn't make you in debt. You did. And so fix it. So, I mean, are there spiritual elements to this? There are probably at times. Am I wanting to just give you a way to identify it specifically? No, because then you're going to run back into that whole pattern of these, deliverance ministry stuff. And some of you are all offended now because you even run deliverance ministries and you think you're saving everybody and doing all these wonderful things. I'm not a big fan, and I've been pretty public about that. I've seen it cause more harm than good almost always. And it's all out of something not here. What they do, you do not find in this book. They have you repeat prayers and say things, and none of which you ever see anybody going through any kind of deliverance in there ever has to do. Anybody that's actually possessed, how does it work? Somebody walked over and said, get out. The person who was possessed did nothing, did they? Did you ever see them do anything? No. Yeshua cast them out. The disciples cast out. When you go to deliverance ministries, is that what you get? Oh, no. You're going to confess all this stuff and go through all these hoops and do all these song and dance and all these written prayers. I don't see that anywhere in here. Oh, but we're getting all this great results. Are you really? I'm just saying. Okay, so just be careful with all that. So is there a spiritual side? With most things, there's a spiritual side, but it depends on what your definition and my definition is of spiritual side. When I talk about spirit being the intrinsic nature of something, yes, there may be a problem with the intrinsic nature of your generational behavioral patterns that needs to be changed from its nature to his nature, your nature to his nature. The spirit of man versus the spirit of Elohim, our nature versus his nature. Go back and listen to the Ruach teachings. Go back and listen to the baptism of fire teachings and whatever other ones I can think of that are connected to that. Go ahead, next question.
From AJ, question is regarding verse 18 and verse 24 and verse 28. Talks about 7 times more punishment. Do these stack if the arrogance continues?
Yeah, well, each one is additionally on top of the other. Basically, think of it this way. If I have a child, because it's the best way to think of it, because I always, we're talking about our Heavenly Father as a parent to us. So let's look at it with a child. If I have a child that is misbehaving and I take away their phone for a day, let's just say that's just to make it simple, and it doesn't have the desired effect, then I'm going to ramp it up to a higher punishment. So I may take the phone away for longer, or I may take the phone and other things away, or I may do something even separate from that and just add more to it. But the escalation is what you need to see that's happening. It's escalating because the thing that was done up to this point didn't. It says that these things are to instruct us. He says, if you are not instructed by me. So if what he's doing is not waking you up, he's going to make it more severe to get your attention. Think of it this way. Have you ever walked up to somebody, children do this, and they kind of start tapping on you a little bit? And the next thing you know, you might feel a kick because the tapping isn't getting anywhere? That's what he's doing. He's trying to tap you and say, hey, listen, want to wake up and fix this now? Oh, you don't? Okay, you're not paying attention? Let's turn it up a little bit. And we're going to keep turning up the volume, the heat, whatever metaphor you prefer, until you actually recognize, oh, wow, this is painful and awful, and wait a minute, I'm probably causing this. And maybe I need to do something about it. And so, yes, they do stack in a certain manner. Some of them may not continue, but some of them, once he's wiped out all these things, well, there's nothing more. It's not all of a sudden like after he took away all the crops and the fruit of the trees, like all of a sudden he's going to give you that back and give you a different punishment. No, you're still not going to have any of that, and he's going to do some more things to you. Next question.
All right, and Leanne asked, are the cursings of the land and the failure to produce referring to failure to obediently rest the land every 7 years and on the Jubilee year?
There are parts of this have to do with that whole Shemitah cycle, the Jubilee cycle, okay? But it also is connected to our personal observance of these things. What he's also showing is that what we do, Torah observant-wise or not, affects the planet. Okay, it affects the planet. And so that's why if the people are taken off of a piece of land because it's laid waste, that part of the planet gets at least left fallow and gets to be able to refresh itself because nobody's on there wrecking or messing around with it. Okay, Daweed?
I just had a comment that might be give a little bit of a rounded picture to why the punishments are there in the first place. They're supposed to be instructional. They're from my perspective, they're to remind us who our provider is. We would have nothing if it wasn't for him. And so, as like a parent, like you said, a parent gives the child everything. So if the parent has to start taking things away, he's trying to remind the child, look, you get nothing apart from me. I am in charge of you. And by your disobedience, you're showing your ingratitude. So that's my take on it.
Excellent. And actually what that does is, anybody get inspired to a verse based on what he said? How about Deuteronomy 8? Okay? In Deuteronomy 8 it says, be on guard lest you forget Yahweh your Elohim by not guarding his commands. Because why? Because you've eaten and you are satisfied, and you got lovely houses, and you got all this wealth and all this stuff. And so you don't think you need him anymore. And then we could drop down to verse 19. It says, "It shall be if you by any means forget Yahweh and follow other mighty ones and serve them, etc. I have warned you this day that you shall certainly perish. And Yahweh is, like the nations Yahweh is destroying before you, so you shall perish because you did not obey the voice of Yahweh." Thank you, David, because that does connect those things together. Because in the taking away and taking away, he's also showing you, you didn't provide all this. You didn't just bring this all about. This came because of my blessing you. And so if you're going to get all full of yourself thinking you don't need me and everything exists because of you, and you don't have need of outside help from me, well, I'll just take it all away and show you how quickly you need me. And Deuteronomy 8 says exactly that same thing, starting in verse 10, going all the way down to verse 18, 19. Well, actually, I went all the way to 20. This is the basis of the Birkat Hamazon, the blessing after the meal. To understand, every meal here at some point, you're going to we'll be stopping at the end to interrupt everything after everyone is eating. And you'll have me ask that question: have you eaten and are you satisfied? And if the answer is yes, which it will always be because the food here is great, we'll be saying, Abba, we thank you for providing all that we have. And that's a good thing for you to do at the end of all your meals. And all the things that you do is to do what's known as the blessing after the meal. You don't have to make it all formal. Just ask your children, have we eaten and are we satisfied? Yes. Well, then let's pause and recognize the provider of what we have. That's the essence of Deuteronomy 8. Okay. Now, next question. Is there anything else? Are we good? All right. And we're actually early, which is, and without Oneg, we got a lot of time to kill, which is fine. We'll get to see each other and get to fellowship and all that kind of good stuff, which is great. All right, so let's get the children, because some of them, some of the people end up in the hallway. 3. Shabbat Shalom! Shavua Tov! All right. We'll look forward to seeing all of you here tomorrow.